In 2024 and 2025, U.S. patrols began reporting more frequent sightings of foreign naval and research vessels operating close to Alaska's waters. What once felt exceptional is becoming routine, reflecting the new reality of a busier Arctic. PAIM's Arctic ship traffic data confirms this shift, showing a sharp multi-year rise in vessel activity across the region, a concrete sign that the far north is no longer dormant. Alaska now finds itself under global attention, not only for its military position, but also for its shipping routes, resource wealth, environmental stakes, and indigenous communities. And this growing pressure begins with a transformation of the Arctic itself. The Arctic's sudden shift. For most of human history, the Arctic acted like a sealed barrier. Heavy ice sheets made the northern ocean impassable, leaving the region isolated from global trade and conflict. That condition is now collapsing. Satellite data over the past 2 decades shows a steep, ongoing decline in sea ice, with recent summer minimums among the lowest on record. Multi-year ice, which once acted as a stabilizing shield, has thinned dramatically, leaving the region exposed to earlier spring melts and longer fall refreezes. This has extended the ice-free season, not just by a few weeks, but by enough to fundamentally change how the Arctic can be used. The consequence is straightforward but transformative. Waters that were locked in ice are now open for activity. Cargo fleets gain seasonal passage, energy companies get access to seabed deposits, and fishing grounds long blocked by ice become targets of interest. According to PAIM's Arctic ship traffic data, there has been about a 37% rise in unique ships entering the polar code area over the last decade, illustrating how quickly industry has moved to take advantage of the changing conditions. The economic implications are clear. For global shipping, northern routes shave thousands of miles off journeys between Asia and Europe, crossing through the Northeast Passage, which now opens during late summer and early autumn, can save weeks compared to the Suez or Panama canals. For businesses reliant on fast delivery, these time savings mean less fuel burned, lower costs, and a sharper competitive edge. What once was a theoretical trade corridor is becoming a seasonal reality. And as each year of ice loss compounds, those openings grow more dependable. Political consequences follow closely behind. When solid ice kept nations apart, Arctic borders carried little urgency. Today, rival powers seek clear shipping lanes and resource deposits, and legal claims are multiplying. Russia has expanded oil and gas drilling in its northern waters, while other states push for extended continental shelf rights under international law. For the United States, this new scramble is felt most immediately through Alaska. The state sits astride the Bering Strait, the narrow 50-mile wide passage between the Arctic and Pacific. That strait is now a choke point through which commercial and military ships must pass, pulling Alaska directly into international disputes. The geographic position of Alaska amplifies its importance. Lying significantly closer to Asia and Eurasia than many cities in the continental United States, Alaska has long served as a refueling hub for aircraft and cargo carriers linking continents. With today's warming Arctic, that proximity increasingly doubles as a strategic asset. The state now anchors U.S. presence in waters that foreign navies and commercial fleets navigate with increasing regularity. The military dimension of these changes is stark. Ice once functioned as a natural buffer, isolating waters, discouraging trespass, and keeping armed forces at a distance. That defense has thinned alongside the climate record. More open water allows submarines to operate more freely, surface fleets to extend patrols deeper north, and reconnaissance flights to cover new ranges. Navies test the limits of sovereignty with greater frequency, while surveillance networks grow strained by the constant flow of traffic. For the Pentagon, the shift makes Alaska not a backwater, but a front line. Its coasts are where American waters meet expanding Russian and Chinese presence. Beneath these surface dynamics lie still deeper stakes. Geological surveys have long suggested the Arctic seabed holds significant reserves of oil and natural gas, along with rare minerals. While thick ice once kept such deposits beyond reach, the openings of recent years have made exploration more practical. Russia, and other Arctic states are moving quickly, not just with drilling, but through diplomatic filings to extend their maritime claims. For Washington, Alaska represents the U.S. foothold in this contest over resources. Protecting access here and preventing rivals from dominating extraction efforts are now central concerns, merging economic security with territorial defense. The pace of these developments is more abrupt than in most historic frontiers. Strategic regions typically grew into prominence slowly across centuries. The Arctic shift is unfolding inside a single human lifetime. Residents of coastal Alaska, who once watched fishing fleets and seasonal storms, are now seeing international naval patrols cruise past their horizon. Communities that were treated as remote outposts are now touched by the direct consequences of climate change and power politics, colliding in a rapid time frame. The environmental dimension adds another layer of strain. As ice sheets withdraw, coastal erosion accelerates, and permafrost thaw undermines buildings and runways. Entire Alaskan villages face relocation due to collapsing shorelines. These changes are humanitarian as much as they are strategic. The U.S. must think not just about defending waters and routes, but also about supporting communities under pressure from the same retreat of ice that is opening economic opportunity. In maritime terms, the growth is measurable. The Arctic is no longer a quiet expanse sprinkled with occasional fishing craft. The rising volume of cargo ships, tankers, and research vessels is reshaping expectations for search and rescue, port capacity, and Coast Guard readiness. Monitoring systems face heavier loads to track increasing traffic along Alaska's coastline. For a state that once seemed peripheral, these practical demands confirm its emerging status as a global hub. From an overhead view, Alaska no longer reads as a detached wilderness on the edge of the United States. It has become America's northern flank, with direct exposure to rival powers and growing entanglement in disputes over routes and resources. Every ship pushing through the Arctic's seasonal openings forces recognition of the state's strategic position. Where the ice once shielded the region from geopolitics, its absence now draws the world in. This transformation sets the stage for sharper encounters ahead. The opening of Arctic waters is not an abstract chart trend. It is a lived reality for Alaskans seeing foreign ships pass just offshore. And as competition intensifies, what was remote is now contested in full view of the communities who live there. Rising tensions at Alaska's doorstep. Alaska's coast has become a focal point where regional rivalries are visible in daily operations at sea. In recent years, U.S. patrols have reported more frequent transits by Russian and Chinese naval and research vessels near the Aleutians and through the Bering Strait, activity that was once exceptional but is now more regular during the season. These passages bring foreign ships close enough to American waters that they demand constant monitoring. What used to spark headlines a decade ago now registers as part of the routine for Coast Guard crews stationed in Alaska. For the towns along the shoreline, the change is noticeable. Residents who once saw little more than fishing boats or cargo ships now occasionally spot the silhouettes of foreign vessels. Community reports of sightings have shifted from rare conversations to a recurring subject, with many locals acknowledging that the presence of foreign ships has become an ordinary part of summer and autumn life. Yet behind these anecdotes lies a larger concern: the steady normalization of foreign military activity just beyond U.S. territory. At the center of this tension is the Bering Strait, roughly 53 miles wide at its narrowest point. It is the only maritime passage between the Pacific and the Arctic. On one side is Alaska, on the other is Russia, with just two small islands in between. For centuries, heavy sea ice kept this channel difficult to navigate. Now, as summer ice retreats earlier and freezes later, the strait is open for longer periods. Cargo freighters, fishing fleets, polar research expeditions, and military patrols from competing powers all pass through this bottleneck. Geography makes it unavoidable. Every vessel traveling north or south must cross this narrow span. It has become a choke point where three powers continually measure each other's presence. The U.S. Coast Guard has widened its role in response. Patrols launched from Alaskan bases now track foreign activity almost daily during open water seasons. Duties that once focused on icebreaking or rescue operations increasingly include shadowing unfamiliar ships, confirming their origins, and documenting their movements. Crews describe the strain of keeping radar screens under constant watch in case a new contact drifts toward U.S. waters. Each blip could represent a cargo freighter, scientific research ship, or warship. Regardless of type, every approach triggers the need for identification and oversight. For Moscow, projecting power along these routes demonstrates endurance and reach. Its fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, the largest in the world, ensures steady access to northern waters. Russian surveillance and naval vessels moving along the edge of Alaska's exclusive economic zone signal both capacity and intent. Beijing, though farther removed geographically, has sought to establish itself as a near-Arctic power. Chinese research ships and naval patrols appear yearly, signaling operational competence in polar conditions and lending weight to broader strategic claims. When the two fleets operate in tandem, their combined activity underscores the coordinated interest of America's principal competitors in the region. The increase in traffic elevates the risk of misunderstanding. At less than 60 miles wide, the Bering Strait leaves little room for miscalculation. A navigation error, failure of communication, or aggressive maneuver can escalate tension rapidly. While both sides typically manage incidents professionally, every close approach highlights how slim the buffer is between steady monitoring and potential confrontation. The narrow waters compress all activity, commercial, scientific, and military, into a corridor where interactions are hard to avoid. For U.S. commanders, the challenge is not simply presence, but vigilance under constant pressure. Local perception reflects these realities. Fishermen out at sea may find their nets set beside the path of a passing icebreaker. Tour operators occasionally share the horizon with distant silhouettes of foreign warships. For many coastal residents, the unusual has become less surprising, though no less unsettling. Their experience speaks to the immediacy of strategic competition. Global powers are no longer abstract players, but visible neighbors navigating just offshore. From a military perspective, Alaska's position underscores American vulnerability. The distance across the strait is less than a 2-hour transit for most ships, meaning rival navies can appear almost at will near U.S. territory. Few other American regions sit this close to competing powers. As sightings increase, bases along Alaska's coast have expanded operations to house more aircraft, surveillance teams, and response units. The combination of proximity and frequency turns Alaska into a point where the United States must demonstrate daily readiness. Every passage carries a layered message. For Russia, routine voyages affirm that its presence in the Arctic cannot be ignored. For China, seasonal transits lend legitimacy to its claim for a role in polar governance. For the U.S., acknowledging and tracking each vessel reinforces its responsibility to protect both its territorial rights and the security of its population in the north. These interactions rarely make headlines in the continental states, but they shape the lived environment in Alaska as much as winter storms or fishing seasons. The blurring of civilian and military life is also visible along the coast. Surveillance flights often operate from runways located near small communities. Coast Guard detachments cycle through towns where local populations sometimes number in the dozens. On any given day, subsistence hunters, researchers, tourists, and service members may share the same harbor. Daily life continues, but with the constant backdrop of strategic activity. The presence of the Bering Strait amplifies every development. As a global choke point, it is not only a route for naval monitoring, but also a vital artery for commercial ships and a fragile habitat for marine ecosystems. Its narrow geography concentrates all use into one shared channel. With each successive year of declining ice, the number of passages rises, raising the stakes for managing congestion, sovereignty, and environmental safety. Strategic competition overlays practical concerns of navigation and stewardship, complicating every discussion of the Strait's future. By 2025, Alaska has become the place where American shores directly meet competing ambitions in the Arctic. What were once rare sightings are now more predictable, tied to seasonal patterns of maritime activity. Exercises by rival navies take place in waters visible to local communities. Icebreakers cut through passages that were once frozen over. The effect is a coastal frontier that absorbs the world's rivalries into its daily rhythms. And as the waters grow busier each season, the ships passing the Strait carry more than military symbolism. They are also measuring time, distance, and cost, the elements that define global trade. It is here that strategic rivalry collides with a second transformation: the growing role of Arctic passages as commercial highways linking continents. The new shipping arteries. For centuries, the image of ships cutting directly across the top of the globe belonged more to legend than reality. Early explorers tried to chart northern passages, but with limited success. Expeditions were defeated by walls of ice, unpredictable weather, and the sheer danger of navigation. That barrier, once thought permanent, is now eroding. Seasonal melting has transformed what were dreamlike routes into functioning corridors. By the mid-2020s, both the Northern Sea route along Russia's coast and Canada's Northwest Passage are no longer theoretical. They are routes with measurable, documented traffic. The shift from myth to active shipping gate has happened in a matter of decades, not centuries, and its implications stretch far beyond the Arctic Circle. The Northern Sea route stands at the center of this transformation. Each summer it supports dozens of transits, aided by Russia's fleet of nuclear and diesel icebreakers that escort ships through remaining ice fields. The country maintains the largest such fleet in the world, providing infrastructure that gives shipping firms more confidence in attempting these passages. For bulk commodities like liquefied natural gas, some firms already view the NSR as a cost-effective seasonal alternative between East Asia and Northern Europe. The appeal is measurable. Travel times can be cut by nearly 2 weeks compared to southern routes, translating into meaningful fuel savings and reduced operational costs. But along with the benefits come persistent risks. Ice coverage is shrinking, but not disappearing. According to analysis referenced by NCID and studies such as PANG 2023, the most reliable window for passage remains narrow, late summer into early autumn, meaning schedules can still be disrupted by sudden weather shifts or unexpected ice. Insurance companies increasingly offer seasonal coverage, but uncertainty around timing remains one of the main barriers preventing wider adoption. The Northwest Passage follows a similar pattern on a smaller scale. Its geography makes navigation even more unpredictable, and Canada continues to treat its waters as sensitive territory. Yet commercial usage is expanding yearly, and the simple fact of completed voyages alters long-standing assumptions. Shipping consortiums model the economics. European companies weigh westward cuts across Canada, while Asian fleets explore shorter access to Atlantic markets. Although full fleet integration into the Northwest Passage is far from universal, each successful journey adds confidence to the perception that this once inaccessible corridor can become an occasional link in the chain of global trade. As with the NSR, barriers remain. Limited port infrastructure, tricky navigation, and variable ice mean the route cannot yet compare with southern canals in predictability. But its very existence as an operational option matters. These emerging routes align with broader pressures in global logistics. Shipping firms work on slim efficiency margins, measured in days, even hours. Southern choke points like the Panama and Suez canals remain vital, but both face congestion or geopolitical disruption. In contrast, the Arctic's challenge was always natural. With ice retreating, barriers are shifting from physical to logistical. For companies balancing fuel costs, crew time, and timetables, even a narrow seasonal lane is worth analyzing. Every successful transit spreads perception of viability further into the industry. Still, unpredictability keeps northern routes from overtaking traditional ones. In a sense, the Arctic offers tantalizing opportunity, but not yet full reliability. Alaska cannot avoid the consequences of these shifts. When ships exit the Russian coast and turn south into the Pacific, or when they thread through the Bering Strait, they pass directly along Alaska's maritime boundary. The geography ensures that the state functions as the first point of contact for vessels moving between the northern and southern oceans. The oversight role is not optional. The U.S. Coast Guard must track these entries to enforce safety, confirm compliance with regulations, and identify unfamiliar ships. Alaska becomes the threshold through which global cargo moves from Arctic waters toward Pacific ports. The metaphor of a toll gate is accurate enough, though the cost is measured less in currency than in constant monitoring, oversight, and readiness. Traffic levels illustrate how sharply this has grown. PAME's Arctic ship traffic data shows more than one-third increase in unique vessels entering the polar code area over the past decade. Between 2013 and 2023, the total number of voyages nearly doubled during peak summer months. For Alaskans, these figures are not abstract. Coastal communities witness the rising traffic in the form of larger cargo vessels appearing with regularity on the horizon. Fishing crews share waters once used almost exclusively for local industry. Radar stations watch their screens fill with daily ship movements that used to happen only occasionally. Surveillance is now continuous, not seasonal, and that shift touches both national strategy and local life. Economic developments follow quickly. Growth in Arctic traffic drives interest in logistical expansion. Towns along Alaska's coast are increasingly assessed as potential staging grounds for support facilities. Anchorage attracts international freight companies, while smaller ports look for opportunities to handle resupply or maintenance. The transformation is already visible. In 2025, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers awarded a $399.4 million contract to expand the Port of Nome, the country's northernmost deep draft port. Scheduled in phases, the expansion aims to accommodate larger vessels and increase fuel and resupply capacity. Projects like this turn abstract projections about shipping growth into brick-and-mortar infrastructure, preparing for a busier future. For a state that has long depended economically on oil, maritime services now stand out as a credible new pillar. But greater activity means greater responsibility. Unlike large oceans, the Bering Strait is a narrow bottleneck, forcing all traffic through a limited channel. The risk profile here differs from open waters. Collisions, groundings, or system failures can have significant consequences in such tight confines. When civilian shipping intersects with foreign naval patrols, the stakes are even higher. The Coast Guard and supporting agencies face the task of handling commerce and security simultaneously, each affecting the other. Expanding surveillance, rescue readiness, and navigational guidance becomes essential to prevent accidents that could quickly escalate into crises. Environmental impact adds another concern. Arctic ecosystems are slow to recover from disturbance, and shipping introduces noise, oil spill risks, invasive species from ballast tanks, and pressure on marine mammals moving along migratory routes. Alaskan communities depend on these resources, often for subsistence as much as for economy. The same infrastructure preparing to profit from new lanes must also be designed to mitigate these dangers. Plans for Nome's expansion, for example, include provisions for oil spill response capability, reflecting the awareness that increased capacity cannot come without increased resilience. The balance between opportunity and vulnerability occupies almost every discussion of Arctic maritime development. The symbolism of this change matters as well. These shipping arteries demonstrate in visible form that the Arctic is shifting from frontier to working part of the global economy. A wide container ship loaded with electronics cutting past the Alaskan coast represents something very different from icebound exploration voyages a century ago. Each transit not only moves goods, but also redefines Alaska's position on the map, not as a far-flung outpost, but as a site of passage connecting continents. By 2025, the image of northern waters as icebound wastes is badly outdated. They are increasingly described by operational terms: corridors, choke points, supply hubs. This emerging system affects strategy as well as commerce. Neither the Northern Sea Route nor the Northwest Passage will displace the Suez or Panama in sheer volume of traffic anytime soon. But their very existence introduces new variables into planning for governments, fleets, and firms. Routes once dismissed as impossible are proving viable in a narrow but real window each year. That viability adds complexity to negotiations, ship allocation, and geopolitical calculations. And with Alaska at the hinge point connecting Arctic and Pacific waters, its role cannot be detached from any of these changes. As the Northern Corridor grows busier, the world recognizes Alaska not just as terrain, but as infrastructure, part of the system that keeps goods flowing from continent to continent. The expansion of maritime routes inevitably highlights the significance of its coastal towns, ports, and logistical hubs. One of these hubs in particular stands out, both for the scale of its facilities and for its position on the map. It is there where Arctic routes intersect with trans-Pacific links that Alaska's global weight becomes most visible. Anchorage, a global pivot point. Anchorage might not immediately stand out as a city with global reach. To most Americans, it is thought of as a regional hub, tied to Alaska's local politics, daily routines, and its role as the state's largest city. But when you examine its placement relative to international air and sea corridors, Anchorage emerges as a critical junction in global logistics. Its airport consistently ranks among the busiest cargo airports in the world, serving as a refueling and transshipment point for global carriers that rely on polar flight paths and the efficiencies of northern routes. This importance is easiest to see in aviation. Long-haul cargo flights crossing the Pacific and Arctic often cannot travel non-stop with full payloads, making Anchorage International Airport a practical waypoint. Aircraft land to refuel, rotate crews, and reorganize cargo before continuing on to major distribution centers in the lower 48. On a given day, pallets containing electronics from Asia sit temporarily on Alaskan tarmacs, only hours from their origin, before being reloaded for final legs to Chicago, Dallas, or Los Angeles. That cycle repeats continuously around the clock. For logistics operators, Anchorage provides a predictable, well-equipped facility that reduces costs and keeps time-sensitive deliveries on schedule. What makes Anchorage a global cargo hub is its geography. While passenger traffic reflects the state's modest population, cargo operations operate on a different scale entirely. Anchorage sits almost equidistant between major centers of production in East Asia and manufacturing or consumer hubs in North America. Global carriers such as FedEx and UPS, along with international cargo divisions from Asia and Europe, schedule Anchorage stops because the positioning shortens distances and allows more efficient refueling compared to southern alternatives. Fuel savings for long-haul aircraft translate into significant operational benefits, and routes through Anchorage reinforce the city's reputation as an indispensable logistical hinge. The city's infrastructure magnifies that advantage. Anchorage International supports high volumes of cargo handling with round-the-clock staff, extensive ramp space, and specialized equipment tailored for freight operations. It is one of the largest employers in the city, with thousands of residents working in jobs tied directly to international cargo flows, loading containers, monitoring customs, transporting goods to connecting flights, and managing the constant logistics cycle. For the people of Anchorage, participation in global supply networks is not abstract. It shapes employment and local opportunity on a daily basis. One vivid example shows how this plays out. A wide-body freighter departs sole-loaded with electronics, lands in Anchorage to take on fuel, and while crews switch out, a portion of its cargo is offloaded and transferred. Some of the pallets continue south for delivery to major U.S. markets, while others are routed on smaller aircraft bound for remote Alaskan communities, such as Bethel or Barrow. That single stop in Anchorage links goods designed in Asia not only to coastal cities in the continental United States, but also to villages accessible only by small planes. Few airports in the world function simultaneously as both the backbone of global commerce and the supply point for isolated local populations. But in Anchorage, the two roles intersect every day. Anchorage's logistical weight extends beyond aviation. its coastal access and internal infrastructure make it a staging ground for maritime activity. While the port of Anchorage does not rival the massive container complexes of Seattle or Los Angeles, it serves as the key entry point for goods crossing into Alaska and as a potential node in future Arctic shipping systems. With northern corridors opening seasonally, ships that move between Asia and Europe by way of the Bering Strait must pass waters adjacent to Alaska before continuing either south or across the Arctic. Anchorage's warehouses, transport connections, and port space provide options for storage, repair, and redistribution. These functions complement the city's role in aviation, giving it value across both dominant global modes of transport. For businesses, choosing Anchorage often comes down to cost efficiency. Each hour saved in flight time reduces fuel consumption by thousands of dollars. Each diversion point equipped with reliable handling facilities reduces risk for high-value cargo. Anchorage delivers both. Even though the city lacks the pull of a massive domestic consumer base, operators still depend on it because it eases integration between continents. Its role in the chain is functional, not symbolic. It saves money, reduces the likelihood of delays, and links networks that would otherwise stretch too far without intermediate support. Military logistics mirror these advantages. The U.S. military uses Anchorage, international and associated facilities, to move personnel and equipment across the Pacific for many of the same reasons commercial carriers do. It shortens lengths of polar routes, provides secure refueling, and ensures reliable maintenance. Aircraft flying between the U.S. mainland and Asia frequently route through Anchorage, making the city one of the Pentagon's most practical logistical nodes in the North Pacific region. The overlap between military and commercial needs amplifies Anchorage's status. This is a city where everyday commercial operations run parallel to national defense mobility. Maritime considerations, though smaller in scale at present, are tied to future Arctic growth. Proposals for expanded capacity at nearby ports, such as the Nome deep draft improvements already underway, reflect a broader recognition that Anchorage's location may come under greater demand as northern routes become more reliable. If the Northern Sea Route or Northwest Passage continue to attract greater shipping interest, Anchorage's intermodal connections could provide continuity between northern sea lanes and Pacific or continental destinations. Unlike global hubs driven by enormous populations or massive finance industries, Anchorage's weight derives from geography and utility. It does not house stock exchanges or multinational headquarters. Instead, its value comes from making distant places more connected and more efficient. Cargo planes traversing between continents confirm that Anchorage is not peripheral, but central to their operations. Ships crossing hemispheres view it as an emergency diversion or a potential service point. This practical centrality defines its significance. The economic impact of this position is measurable and growing. Anchorage routinely ranks among the world's top airports for cargo volume, moving hundreds of thousands of tons annually. That throughput places it alongside cities many times its size, underscoring that practical routes and logistical function matter as much as scale. The facilities built to serve these flows also sustain Alaska's internal economy, ensuring that even small coastal or interior towns remain connected to global commerce. For a community cut off from highways, supplies delivered through Anchorage often represent the only reliable link to medicine, construction materials, or fuel. It is one of the few places in the world where the same warehouse might prepare packages destined for both Midwestern supermarkets and tundra villages only reachable by plane. The future suggests this role will deepen as Arctic shipping continues to expand, and as aircraft increasingly integrate polar routes into standard operations. Anchorage will feature constantly in planning documents for logistics firms worldwide. It already appears as a built-in stop for many major carriers, and the trend lines for cargo growth point toward increasing, not diminishing, importance. For Alaska, this dual character is central. Anchorage sustains the global distribution system, while anchoring supply chains essential to life in the state's remote communities. Anchorage, then, is not just a node of commerce, but a point of convergence. It balances global cargo flows with local supply needs, integrates commercial interests with military logistics, and bridges oceanic shipping with polar aviation. Its importance is practical, measurable, and unlikely to diminish given current patterns. Yet geography in Alaska has always carried not only economic weight, but also strategic consequences. As the northern shipping lanes grow busier and commercial reliance on Anchorage solidifies, broader demands arise on the same infrastructure and airspace. Meeting those demands requires more than cargo capacity. It calls for renewed investment in defense and surveillance systems built into the same geography. That next dimension is already taking shape, and it is altering Alaska's profile in ways that go beyond trade. Rebuilding a military frontier. For much of the early 21st century, Alaska's military installations carried on with little more than basic upkeep. The Cold War's vast network of bases remained, but years of limited investment had turned them into quiet outposts rather than central nodes. That posture is shifting. In recent years, federal spending on Alaskan defense infrastructure has escalated sharply, reflecting the strategic weight now assigned to the Arctic. The FY 2025 defense authorization alone included more than $790 million for projects in Alaska, ranging from housing improvements to fuel facilities and upgrades at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, making it one of the most heavily funded regions in the defense budget for construction. The message from Washington is direct. Facilities once treated as remote are now indispensable. Nowhere is this more visible than at Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks. Once known primarily for training exercises, Eielson today supports advanced fighter squadrons and expanding mission sets. Planners are also examining how to secure power and resilience for Arctic operations, including proposals for independent energy sources, such as microreactors, to ensure a stable supply regardless of outside disruptions. While such concepts remain debated and controversial, especially given the fragile ecosystems of Alaska, the discussion itself reflects how military planners now see self-sufficiency as critical to long-term Arctic defense. Even without full-scale energy projects in place, ongoing upgrades in hangars, runways, and maintenance arrays signal that Eielson is no longer peripheral. Further south, Fort Greely continues its evolution as a cornerstone of American missile defense. Originally built around a small cluster of interceptors, its role has expanded with upgraded systems capable of faster response and broader coverage. Alaska's location makes this expansion more than symbolic. Any intercontinental weapon launched from northern Eurasia toward the continental United States would cross over the Arctic, placing Alaska directly in its path. By strengthening Fort Greely, defense planners narrow the gap between detection and decision, a matter measured in minutes, but critical in global deterrence. Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, adjacent to Anchorage, grows in parallel. It has become a central hub for airlift, fighter operations, and Army readiness. Expanded hangars, new housing for rotating personnel, and modernized logistics facilities indicate a permanent scale of activity rather than temporary surges. For Anchorage itself, this means constant movement of personnel and goods to support operations. Jobs tied to defense contracts and base services spread through local communities, while housing markets and infrastructure strain under the influx of staff and families linked to this growing mission. The buildup extends beyond individual bases to the systems that connect them. New radar arrays positioned across rugged northern terrain create overlapping fields of coverage in areas once left unmonitored. These integrate with satellite sensors to provide real-time awareness of traffic across polar skies and seas. The result is a layered surveillance net designed to track everything from bombers testing polar routes to submarines surfacing in thinning Arctic waters. Where gaps once existed, there is now persistent coverage, a structural shift reflecting a new security environment. Training and exercises reinforce these investments. Large-scale drills now regularly unfold using Alaskan facilities, drawing in not only U.S. units, but also allied partners from NATO, Canada, and the Pacific. These maneuvers test how forces deploy in harsh Arctic conditions, how supplies move across limited transport routes, and how modern tactics adapt when layered against extreme weather. They are visible demonstrations of readiness, underscoring that Alaska is where theory gives way to practice for future polar operations. Local communities experience the revival as both opportunity and burden. Contractors supplying construction and maintenance benefit from steady federal spending, diversifying economies traditionally reliant on oil or seasonal industries. Yet persistent flight noise, environmental concerns, and the strain of expanded troop presence bring debate. The tension illustrates a larger balance. Local populations caught between the benefits of government investment and the costs of life alongside major military operations. The broader justification rests on comparisons across the Arctic. Russia operates dozens of modernized bases and ports along its northern shore and commands the world's largest fleet of icebreakers, including nuclear-powered heavy icebreakers that sustain access across the Polar Sea. China, framing itself as a near-Arctic state, continues to operate research vessels and extend naval presence into northern waters in cooperation with Russia. In contrast, the U.S. maintains only 2 active heavy icebreakers and is now scrambling to accelerate procurement through the Polar Security Cutter program. This imbalance adds weight to the argument for reinforcing Alaska's land-based facilities. Without a robust icebreaker fleet, U.S. presence in the far north depends on strong, resilient bases able to project air power, enforce surveillance, and support naval activity in surrounding waters. Strategists emphasize that this is not a return to past frameworks, but a restructuring for contemporary threats. The Cold War used Alaska largely as a geographical buffer. Today, bases are being rebuilt for continuous operations, designed for resilience and connectivity in real time. Energy independence, rapid data links, and hardened infrastructure all reflect lessons from recent decades. Isolated outposts are no longer sustainable. What is required are forward operating hubs, able to function autonomously while linking into wider command networks. For those serving at these locations day to day, reality combines the grind of isolation with the urgency of frontline duty. Long winters stretch training cycles, yet units adapt to the rhythm with continuous sorties and Arctic drills. Summers bring constant activity, with more daylight enabling extended flight schedules. Families stationed in Alaska grow used to an environment shaped by geopolitical competition as much as by climate. Personnel rotations are steady, making these installations an enduring part of the global posture rather than temporary experiments. Policy documents reflect the same message. Alaska now occupies a central place in U.S. defense planning, not as an appendix, but as a defined core in Arctic security strategy. This recognition drives funding, personnel decisions, and technological priorities. Military planners describe Alaska as a forward frontier, not a contingency fallback, but a baseline of global readiness. The spending figures illustrate this commitment, converting strategy into permanent infrastructure. The cumulative effect is unmistakable. A state once described as a remote flank has been rebuilt into a fortified platform for air power, surveillance, missile defense, and allied coordination. The billions directed into construction, the debate over resilient energy systems, and the layering of radar and aircraft all point toward a single outcome. Alaska functions as the nation's northern line of defense in an increasingly contested Arctic. And while this transformation encompasses logistics, technology, and community change, its most immediate expression lies in one mission above all: the ability to detect and respond to the world's longest-range weapons. That function now places Alaska at the very core of America's defensive shield. Missile defense on the front line. When the subject turns to intercontinental missiles, Alaska is where geography dictates urgency. The shortest route for a weapon launched from northern Eurasia toward the United States cuts across the pole, making Alaska the first U.S. ground in its path. This fact alone explains why missile defense infrastructure has been concentrated here. During the Cold War, such a scenario was theoretical. Today, it is a cornerstone of defense planning, shaping decisions about where to place radars, interceptor silos, and command centers. Anchoring that system is the ground-based mid-course defense program, which positions most of its interceptor force at Fort Greely, Alaska. Of the 44 interceptors currently deployed nationwide, 40 are based here, with only a handful stationed at Vandenberg in California. Their purpose is clear: to collide with warheads in space before they re-enter the atmosphere. The concentration in Alaska is deliberate. By placing interceptors close to the most likely polar flight paths, the U.S. reduces the time between detection and action. In missile defense, those minutes can mean the difference between interception and impact. Detection is only the first step. Radar stationed in Alaska provide some of the earliest warning of launches along polar routes. These include systems upgraded to track multiple objects over long distances while filtering out clutter. In 2025, a new long-range radar test in Alaska demonstrated improved detection ranges, reinforcing the state's role as the first sentinel against polar launches. Such progress addresses long-standing criticism that early systems lack discrimination, sometimes confusing decoys for actual warheads. The upgraded technology adds new confidence, enabling crews to identify and prioritize true threats. Still, Alaska's role is not purely about technology's promise. Critics note the mixed track record of interception tests. Some trials succeeded, while others produced inconclusive or failed outcomes. These uneven results have fueled debate over whether missile defense can offer guaranteed protection. The response from planners has been to continue refining radars and interceptors, emphasizing resilience and improved reliability rather than assumed perfection. By layering upgrades, the aim is to complicate an adversary's calculations, ensuring that any threat directed at the U.S. must contend with a working line of defense. For operational crews stationed at Fort Greely, missile defense is lived as routine duty. Analysts and technicians remain on shift around the clock, monitoring data from satellites, ground-based systems, and allied partners. When unusual movement is detected, procedures require rapid interpretation and verification before any action. Drills are run regularly to ensure crews remain sharp, simulating conditions where seconds matter. Even in quiet intervals, the presence of silos, launch systems, and sprawling radar arrays maintains constant readiness. The systems are maintained not as symbolic deterrents, but as equipment expected to function under real-world pressure. Alaskan communities near the bases experience this presence in tangible ways. Interceptor silos and radar facilities dominate the landscape, requiring security zones and generating construction contracts that ripple through local economies. Towns adjacent to the bases benefit from steady employment and federal investment, whether through technical jobs, base support services, or infrastructure upgrades. At the same time, residents acknowledge the gravity of living alongside national defense installations that feature prominently in global security. Pride and unease coexist. Locals understand their communities play a central role in protecting the entire continental U.S., yet they also recognize that these facilities are noted carefully on maps kept by rival militaries. International responses to Alaska's defenses reflect different calculations. Russian officials regularly interpret U.S. deployment as an attempt to blunt their strategic deterrent, seeing expanded radar coverage and interceptor fields as directed at their Arctic launch corridors. China, ramping up development of long-range and hypersonic weapons, voices concerns that U.S. systems in Alaska limit its freedom to maneuver in polar approaches. Diplomatic statements occasionally criticize American buildup, but Washington continues its path, seeing these projects not as bargaining chips, but as essential defensive posture. From the U.S. perspective, Alaska closes a gap. Without it, the homeland would face open vulnerability from the north. The history of missile defense in Alaska gives continuity to this logic. Early radars built decades earlier scanned Arctic skies for Soviet launches. Those prototypes offered warning without interception capability. Today's versions complete the loop, detecting missiles in space and directing interceptors toward them at speeds of thousands of miles per hour. The shift demonstrates not a change in geography, but in technical ability. Alaska still lies beneath the shortest path between continents. What is different now is the capacity to react. rather than only to observe. The implications stretch beyond immediate defense. Knowing Alaska's systems, operate influences strategic decision-making abroad. Adversaries contemplating coercion or attack must consider the possibility, however partial, of interception. This uncertainty itself contributes to deterrence. Even imperfect defenses complicate risk assessment, reducing an opponent's confidence that a missile strike would achieve its intended effect. Deterrence by denial does not require total certainty. It needs only to introduce doubt strong enough to discourage escalation. Alaska's facilities provide that layer of doubt, turning theoretical protection into a concrete factor in strategic calculus. In public discussions, missile defense rarely features alongside conventional policy debates. Yet in Alaska, its presence shapes daily reality. Construction firms respond to federal contracts. Local officials plan around base populations and infrastructure demands. Families grow accustomed to security zones and regular military exercises. Lives are lived in the shadow not of distant headlines, but of installations that hold global significance. That intersection, small communities supporting technology designed for intercontinental threats, captures the paradox of Alaska's position in American defense. Across defense circles, the future of missile defense in Alaska continues to evolve. Plans focus on modernized interceptors with faster burn rates, radars capable of distinguishing complex countermeasures, and integration with space and sea-based tracking networks. Each step connects local facilities in Alaska to a wider web that crosses oceans and continents. The aim is not simply interception, but resilience across unexpected trajectories. As rival nations expand their capabilities, American reinvestment in Alaska reflects awareness that this narrow state remains indispensable in national security calculations. Taken together, these realities make Alaska's missile defense mission clear and unavoidable. With interceptors concentrated at Fort Greely, upgraded radars demonstrating extended horizons, and crews trained for constant readiness, the state holds the burden of first response against the gravest category of threats. Yet security is only one aspect of Alaska's rising global relevance. Beyond the fences and silos, the ground itself contains another form of power. Vast natural reserves buried beneath soil, rock, and ice, now becoming more accessible as Arctic conditions shift.
The tech edge of 2025. Has the spread of advanced technology truly made life easier for undercover agents, or has it only heightened the suspicion of those they're trying to fool? In 2025, the reality is complicated. Agents now carry tools their predecessors could never have imagined, yet the groups they infiltrate have grown just as skilled at countering them. The result is less a decisive advantage and more a steady arms race, where every new safeguard is met by sharper defenses on the other side. Consider the evolution of hidden cameras. The clunky vests of the past have been replaced with miniature devices that slip into belt buckles, shirt buttons, or a watch face. These aren't blurry, unreliable feeds. They capture crisp video, transmit wirelessly, and disguise their signals against casual scanning. When an agent sits across the table chatting over a beer, the interaction feels informal, but the record of that conversation might later anchor a prosecution. Yet none of this is invisible. Organized groups know the FBI relies on these tools, which is why pat-downs, clothing inspections, and makeshift equipment sweeps are routine. Suspicion doesn't disappear with better design. It sharpens in response to it. Surveillance away from the room has advanced as well. Cover teams no longer rely only on parked cars staged discreetly on nearby streets. Today, smaller drones track vehicles quietly through traffic, while larger craft provide distant overwatch of clubhouses or rural compounds. These aircraft keep operatives from vanishing completely out of sight, but adversaries study these methods too. Some fortified spaces are built with roof structures designed to block aerial angles, while others practice moving only under tree cover to limit visibility. The arms race here isn't the fantasy of insect-sized craft. It's the practical clash between smaller, quieter drones and the evasive tactics groups now built into their routine. Monitoring extends to the agent's own body. Biometric trackers have become standard, embedded in small patches or wearable devices that transmit pulse, motion, and posture back to surveillance teams. A spike in heart rate or sudden collapse alerts handlers instantly, even if the agent can't safely signal over radio. This helps shorten the gap between crisis and intervention. The patch itself can't protect against violence, but it can trigger quicker reactions when seconds matter. Artificial intelligence has introduced another layer of influence. Systems now sift through vast streams of online chatter, linking unusual surges in encrypted channels or coded speech with upcoming meetings or planned actions. The Marshall Project has reported on one concrete example. In New Orleans, a network called Project NOLA links thousands of private security cameras to police, and AI-equipped systems send real-time alerts to law enforcement. In undercover work, these tools allow case teams to anticipate gatherings, map intersections between figures, and predict where danger points might emerge. When an agent walks into a bar or clubhouse, surveillance may already have warned them about who's likely to be present and which topics could surface during a meeting. But the presence of AI brings friction as well as reassurance. The Brennan Center and other watchdogs caution that real-time scanning of social media blurs the line between investigating threats and sweeping up constitutionally protected speech. Agents may gain tactical foresight, but the broader surveillance programs that feed those insights remain deeply controversial. The safety of one operative has to be weighed against the privacy rights of countless others, and the conversation surrounding that balance is far from resolved. Just as the Bureau has equipped itself with more advanced tools, its targets have adopted their own. Scott Payne described one white supremacist case where extremists brought a $500 signal detector into meetings. These devices, first marketed as simple counter-surveillance aids for businesses, now circulate widely. They can identify hidden transmissions in real time, revealing wireless bugs agents rely on. In Payne's experience, routines developed where members would rotate responsibility for sweeping, turning detection into normalized meeting protocol. The cost is low enough that groups with few resources can build this habit into their culture, leaving agents exposed to scrutiny from the moment they enter. That constant threat of detection has pushed the Bureau into inventing layered disguises for its tools. Transmitters are designed to piggyback on the noise of Bluetooth and Wi-Fi channels, blending into the background hiss of any wireless environment. Some are programmed only to activate when triggered, lying dormant during sweeps. Others rely on burst transmissions, sending a flash of data in an instant before falling silent again. The effect is a running chess match, where the Bureau builds concealment while its opponents hunt for cracks. Sometimes that clash looks less like high drama than two sets of technicians squaring off quietly. Undercover agents may sit with forced composure while a device struggles to transmit. Handlers in vans kick equipment and curse at failing software. And across the room, someone pulls out a handheld detector to fuss with batteries. At moments like these, both sides look less like hardened operatives and more like competing IT teams locked in nervous troubleshooting. Yet beneath the awkward surface, those glitches represent life-or-death risks. If an agent's feed collapses, cover teams lose visibility. If a detector pings with the wrong frequency, suspicion sharpens instantly. The seriousness is inescapable. A hidden camera uncovered during a pat-down or a detected signal inside a clubhouse is not a delay or an inconvenience. It is an immediate threat. Likewise, a missed sweep on the opposite side can bring a full operation crashing down months later. Each failure isn't abstract. It cascades through lives, careers, and courtrooms. That's why neither side can afford to relent in the struggle. This cycle shows no sign of slowing. Each adaptation is answered in turn, like a board that never clears. What tips the balance in the Bureau's favor is resources. Laboratories, research divisions, and constant funding streams allow its engineering to evolve faster. Extremist cells or gangs do purchase counters, but they lack the infrastructure to reinvent them continually. In practice, organized crime reacts. The Bureau innovates to stay ahead. That advantage keeps agents working in environments that outwardly appear far too suspicious to enter. Still, advances are no comfort when suspicion rises across the table. Agents live with the knowledge that their tools both protect and expose them. Cameras, drones, patches, and AI are lifelines, but they are also red flags to those on constant alert for infiltration. Undercover life becomes a two-front contest, avoiding human suspicion while simultaneously avoiding technical discovery. Both are relentless, and both demand daily management. And beneath all of it lies the same grounding fact. Equipment does not replace judgment. A hidden patch can't talk you out of a direct accusation, and a drone overhead can't steady your voice under interrogation. These devices extend a team's reach, they gather evidence, and they shorten response times, but they can't make choices in the room. What shapes outcomes most is still the human network surrounding an operative, those monitoring, guiding, and preparing contingencies outside. That layer of support defines whether the tools can function at all, setting the stage for how operations carry forward in practice. Working with the backup team. An undercover agent may look alone when they step into a violent room, but that isolation is never complete. Every move inside is linked to a network outside, a team monitoring, directing, and preparing. The myth of the solitary operative living by instinct only tells half the story. The other half is a coordinated system, case agents, surveillance specialists, technical staff, and legal advisors working around the clock to keep both the mission and the operative alive. Without this backbone, no infiltration could last beyond 1 or 2 encounters. The center is the case team. These aren't just bureau agents. A typical case blends FBI case handlers with local task force officers, state police, DEA counterparts, and at times ATF agents or other specialists. Each brings a different advantage. The FBI holds jurisdiction and investigative oversight, local officers understand the streets and geography, DEA agents extend expertise in drug operations, while task force officers bridge federal and local network. Together, they form the nucleus of support, the agents closest to the operation and responsible for immediate decisions. Around them are surveillance units, often working in rotating vehicles or with static watch posts. Then there are technical teams, operating the cameras, transmitters, and monitoring systems, maintaining the digital channels linking everyone. Finally, legal support runs parallel. Case agents coordinate constantly with prosecutors or DOJ advisors, ensuring that actions remain within entrapment, evidence, and procedural boundaries. Each link matters, and each one is rehearsed until it works without hesitation. When an undercover filters out a small piece of intelligence, a name dropped in conversation, a vehicle parked out front, or an unexpected mention of a meeting, those fragments flow outward. Surveillance immediately logs it, analysts connect it to broader patterns, and case teams fold it into operational planning. Parked vehicles with shaded windows quietly record who enters and leaves, while analysts compare faces against existing records. Technical monitors catalog sounds or coded terms overheard through bugs and relayed devices. The operative doesn't have the luxury of assembling the big picture, so the connection works both ways. The agent feeds pieces, while the team reassembles the puzzle into something actionable. Even with this constant flow, most of the danger still rests with the individual inside. Outside teams prepare contingency plans, but there are limits to what those plans can accomplish. Scott Payne recounted the way fortified clubhouses often shaped response options. In one outlaw's motorcycle club case, doors and reinforced walls meant that even a rapid order to rescue could not have been executed instantly. Teams mapped out possible breaches with vehicles or heavy tools, but the reality remained. Minutes mattered, and those minutes pressed squarely on the shoulders of the lone operative. That limitation is built into the job and accepted in silence, reminding agents that while backup exists, it cannot erase the personal responsibility of surviving immediate confrontation. Because of those limits, case teams do not plan strictly for retaliation, but for balanced outcomes, preserving both evidence and lives if operations collapse. The point isn't to avenge or to arrive after the fact. The point is to create pathways for survival while still protecting the legal standing of an investigation. If a breach became unavoidable, response was calculated, not impulsive, with the risk clearly understood by everyone involved. That calculation colors the way operatives think inside. They know the team outside is ready, but they also know it may not be instant. To make that connection work, communication tradecraft is drilled into habit. Agents use simple, rehearsed signals, a code phrase dropped casually, a prearranged movement, or the flick of a lighter in a certain way. Payne recalled how small physical cues were planned in advance for precisely these moments. The idea wasn't dramatic rescue signals, but ordinary behaviors given meaning through rehearsal. When spoken words or open messages were impossible, these cues brought clarity for those monitoring outside, signaling stress, danger, or readiness without exposing the operative. For the teams, they became lifelines as vital as any piece of technology. Those outside, meanwhile, have to move with near invisibility. Cover teams can't look like cover teams. Surveillance agents spend hours simulating lives in parked vehicles, disguising their presence through ordinary routines. Commuters in parking lots, repair crews idling with tools nearby, a neighbor out for groceries. The reality is often less exciting than imagined, defined by stale food wrappers, uncomfortable car seats, and long stretches of motionless waiting. But these small disguises protect the illusion. One vehicle standing out, one technician shifting too quickly, and the presence of law enforcement becomes obvious. Agents inside may depend on bullets and wit, but just as critical is the teammate outside fiddling with a fast food bag to keep the cover intact. The rhythm of the work shifts constantly. On some nights, everything plays calm. Nothing unusual is logged beyond routine interactions and ordinary traffic. On others, chaos surges, unexpected movements, groups dispersing from meeting halls, or a sudden drive into rural territory. Surveillance units pull into synchronized rotations, redeploying instantly to cover what can no longer be seen from one angle. Decisions come in seconds, driven by trust in plans rehearsed countless times before. The undercover inside might never know the scale of those maneuvers, but they live on the assurance that wherever they walk, orbiting layers are moving with them. In between these bursts, silence often carries the most pressure. 10 minutes without a check-in can feel like hours for the surveillance team. They have no way to know whether the agent inside is deep in conversation, out of reach, or under direct suspicion. Waiting too long risks catastrophe. Moving too soon risks blowing the cover. It becomes a discipline in reading patterns rather than reacting to nerves, letting rehearsed codes and signals carry meaning instead of panic. Operatives may count on their own composure, but cover teams count on it with equal intensity, knowing their judgment in silence matters as much as their speed in action. This tether between the operative and the team is built on trust, no less critical than the trust an agent cultivates inside criminal groups. Agents enter fortified rooms believing not in guaranteed rescue, but in collective attention. They know that beyond these walls, someone is documenting every detail, preparing fallback plans, and tracking patterns closely enough to respond intelligently if danger crests. The security isn't total, but it allows them to focus on role and performance without constantly looking behind them. Out of that trust rises a balance. On their own, undercovers could never sustain operations for months or years. Alone, they would be isolated fragments trapped inside organizations far too resilient for one person to fracture. With coordinated backup, however, those fragments get braided into months of evidence logs, surveillance records, and strategic direction. Independence inside converges with support outside, and only together do they make cases sustainable. And those cases, once the system works as intended, grow far larger than individual encounters. Surveillance, communication, and legal guidance accumulate alongside human presence, producing results that ripple past one night, one conversation, or one clubhouse door. The measure of success reaches beyond survival itself. It rests in whether the machine built around the operative translates those nights into lasting outcome. And that brings the larger question into focus. When all the pieces finally converge, what do these high-stakes operations actually achieve? When operations break crimes apart, undercover operations are never designed just to nab one or two low-level criminals. The entire purpose is to weaken and dismantle the larger structures that allow violent groups and trafficking rings to survive. When the FBI spends months or years investing in a fabricated identity, it isn't to meet a single target. It's to work its way upward, toward the organizers, money handlers, supply chains, and mid-level enforcers who make an organization operate smoothly. Each infiltration is planned like a wedge forced into the core of a network. The aim is not only arrests, but to destabilize the structure so it cannot easily reform. From 2023 through 2025, there have been several examples of how impactful these operations can be. Some of the sharpest involved domestic extremist groups with white supremacist leanings. The work didn't just take down isolated members, it clipped leaders responsible for logistics, propaganda, and weapons access. Pulling them out disrupted communication channels and stopped recruitment pipelines. These weren't symbolic arrests. They reorganized the landscape of entire extremist ecosystems and applied deterrence by making other groups paranoid about infiltration. The same period also brought strides against organized drug factions, especially fentanyl trafficking networks. Agents who entered as minor intermediaries eventually gained access to supplier-level conversations. That undercover access helped track how synthetic opioids moved across borders, through distributors, and into local dealers. The seizures that followed pulled in mass quantities of narcotics and exposed financial reserves used for laundering. While the full effect on public health is difficult to measure in real time, every load intercepted means fewer overdoses and hundreds of potential deaths avoided. Each time the supply chain fractures, rival groups are forced into disarray, and demand for improvisation often exposes new vulnerabilities. Weapons seizures highlight another reach of infiltration. Agents have been able to uncover and shut down stashes of automatic rifles, handguns, and improvised explosives before they left the warehouse stage. It's not just disrupting operations, it's preventing violence that would almost certainly have erupted down the line. Every stockpile intercepted replaces a potential headline about an attack with silence. Those silences aren't easy to celebrate publicly, but they may represent the most important outcomes. Plots stopped at the planning table demonstrate this even more starkly. In one well-documented example, when an FBI undercover embedded in the base, evidence from conversations revealed a suspected plan to murder targets as part of ideological escalation. That intelligence allowed law enforcement to intervene before the discussions shifted to action. Arrests followed, charges were filed, and whatever violence might have come after remained only in transcripts and court filing. It's prevention by deception, a tangible reminder that an undercover's presence often swaps a public tragedy for an unmarked what if. Drug trafficking operations tell a parallel story. Scott Payne's infiltration of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club in Massachusetts showed how a single undercover could pull back the curtain on something sprawling. His work inside revealed exchanges involving narcotics, money transfers, and firearms. Those details became the evidence that secured pleas and convictions when cases moved into court. By design, multi-agency coordination, DEA for drug components, local officers for surveillance, and FBI case agents allowed the intelligence he gathered to trigger arrests across multiple fronts. The real success wasn't a singular bust, but a combined outcome that fractured the club's financial and distribution model. The ripple effect of these operations runs deep. Pulling dozens of people out of a fentanyl chain, for example, doesn't only remove dealers from the street. It also sends a wave of uncertainty through suppliers, mules, and collateral groups. Fear of infiltration spreads, paranoia grows, and loyalty inside begins to weaken. Sometimes groups disband purely from suspicion of one another. Undercover work functions as disruption beyond its direct victories. It seeds instability that stretches far further than the cases filed in court. One standout pattern shows how far these operations go. Undercover agents become trusted enough to sit in meetings mapping routes, counting cash, or plotting ideological violence. Those quiet moments of access are turned into courtroom evidence. In essence, agents transform private conversations into prosecutable facts, often becoming the central witness around which entire trials are built. Because the testimony is grounded in simultaneous recordings or direct surveillance corroboration, juries see these statements not as speculation, but as irrefutable confirmation. That's one of the reasons why prosecutors view undercover collected evidence as some of the strongest available. But it's important to note that even the most impressive infiltrations don't operate in isolation. They succeed because of coordinated frameworks, surveillance teams documenting movements, technical units gathering intercepted chatter, informants feeding tips, and case agents weaving these strands together. Undercover work provides the inside anchor, but dismantling an organization requires all of these parts to align. Without surveillance logs, analytical patterning, and prosecutor oversight, the weight of an undercover's findings would never hold in court. It's the combined system that delivers impact. Examples reinforce this. In fentanyl cases, undercover intelligence aligned with warehouse surveillance and border intercepts to make the evidence undeniable. In extremist cases, conversations documented undercover connected with intercepted online propaganda and weapons seizures to paint the full picture. These were not individual heroics. They were carefully layered efforts where one agent's access became part of a larger net cast by multiple agencies and task forces. The payoff often isn't visible to the public. Communities don't always see the headline that says how many lives were saved, because saving lives by prevention leaves no obvious trace. What they do see are indictments, guilty pleas, and chains of firearms or drugs linked directly to infiltrations. Between 2023 and 2025, operations repeatedly showed how deeply undercover work shapes prosecution. Cash seized, guns taken, pills removed, and plots never executed. Each absence, each quiet gap where violence should have echoed, represents the core purpose of putting an operative inside. This is why the work remains so essential in 2025. Technology can scan, track, and model data points, but an undercover can hear hesitation in a voice, press on a story, or watch money change hands. These subtleties bridge the gap between suspicion and certainty. When those moments are captured, they migrate from dangerous rooms to evidence tables, turning what could have been bloodshed into controlled court proceeding. In practical terms, undercover operations turn inside conversations into courtroom evidence, and often into prevention. It is difficult, dangerous, and often hidden, but this cycle of infiltration and disruption forms one of the most powerful levers federal agencies still have. Entire extremist cells are neutralized before attacks, trafficking rings are gutted before shipments spread, and gangs fracture without their organizers. These moments show not just one victory, but the broader reshaping of criminal landscapes. All of these achievements, however, raise another problem. With networks increasingly communicating online and with technology expanding on both sides, the question is shifting. The issue is no longer only how undercover work dismantles crime today, it's how this method will adapt tomorrow.
Environmental fallout of a strategic boom. Alaska's emergence as a center of global activity mirrors a parallel story of environmental strain. Strategic investment, energy development, and shipping expansion are often measured in revenue or geopolitical advantage, yet the effects on land and water are less easily captured. What was once a sparsely disturbed environment is now absorbing pressures across multiple fronts. Climate change as a baseline force, with industrial traffic, drilling, mining, and defense construction layered on top. Together they create conditions where ecological systems are tested daily by the pace of human expansion. One of the clearest examples lies in shipping. The Bering Strait funnels nearly all Arctic-bound vessel traffic, concentrating commercial and military ships into a narrow passage. Each transit echoes underwater in ways imperceptible to people, but disruptive to whales, seals, and walrus. Studies compiled through Arctic Council working groups and conservation organizations note that rising noise alters bowhead whale migration, reducing predictability for hunters who depend on them. Growing traffic also raises collision risks. Each incident can be devastating for species that reproduce slowly. And black carbon emissions from vessel engines compound the dangers. When particles settle on ice, they darken surfaces, trapping heat and accelerating melt. Carried in tandem with heavy fuel oil, the risks multiply. Black carbon harms respiratory health when inhaled, while spills of HFO in polar seas are nearly impossible to contain. International pressure has built around this issue, and in response, the International Maritime Organization agreed to phase in a ban on HFO carriage and use. But exemptions and gradual timelines have left gaps, leaving communities and researchers warning that protection remains incomplete. These impacts compress into three urgent realities. First, underwater noise disrupts whale communication and migration in ways now documented across Arctic waters. Second, HFO spills in icy seas are catastrophic and resistant to cleanup, with consequences extending across fisheries and marine food webs. Third, mineral mining and the roads built to support it cut into freshwater systems that sustain Alaska's salmon runs, undermining both cultural and ecological foundations. Each of these pressures represents a different pathway through which international activity translates into local fragility. Energy production carries its own weight of concern. Large projects, such as the Willow development, inject significant investment, but also raise the specter of spills in remote northern terrain. Oil in Arctic waters behaves differently than in temperate seas, binding to ice and persisting in ways that standard dispersants and booms cannot fully address. Even when equipment is ready, Distances delay deployment. During those gaps, contaminants infiltrate currents, shorelines, and fish populations. Communities living off salmon and commercial fisheries sense this risk firsthand. Each season without incident feels like fortune, but the logic of probability suggests that higher volumes of traffic and drilling increase the chances of failure. One spill could reshape food webs for decades. The problems carry inland as well. Mining projects hinge on land clearance, waste management, and the construction of road networks across fragile tundra and boreal systems. These cut through caribou ranges and tundra wetlands that hold carbon in their soils. When disturbed, those lands release emissions that reinforce global climate instability. For villages along rivers, the more immediate threat is water quality. Sediment loads, chemical contamination, and altered flow patterns threaten salmon systems that hold together both diets and economies. What appears in policy briefs as essential strategic minerals instead appears on the ground as potential disruption of food security. Military expansion adds another dimension. Radar stations, training ranges, and airfields require hardened infrastructure in landscapes already pressured by climate change. Jet noise carries across wilderness where caribou and migratory birds attempt to adapt to shifting patterns. Construction for radar arrays or proposed resilient energy systems pushes into zones that otherwise would remain undisturbed. The Department of Defense stresses necessity, but for people living nearby, the expansion compounds environmental stress caused by weather shifts and industrial activity. Coastlines that have already eroded from thawing permafrost now absorb supporting installations, increasing the sense of intrusion. What decision-makers confront is a collision of imperatives. National security requires bases, missile defense, and shipping oversight. Energy needs push further drilling into northern reserves. Global supply chains demand mineral input. Yet every one of these has direct ecological consequences. Mitigation programs exist, regulations on vessel speeds in whale zones, the investment of spill response capabilities, mandatory environmental reviews on mineral development. But implementation across Alaska's vast expanses is inconsistent. Enforcement requires actual presence, and distances in the Arctic complicate oversight. Indigenous monitoring collaboratives add important local capacity, but funding and authority often lag far behind demand. The debate shifts, therefore, from whether activity should occur to how it can proceed responsibly. Some experts call for strict speed limits through the Bering Strait, coupled with real-time tracking enforceable by satellite and Coast Guard patrols. Conservation advocates emphasize accelerating the HFO carriage ban and closing exemption loopholes. Mining debates push for stronger adherence to care principles and direct co-management with affected communities. Each of these steps involves cost and coordination, but without them the scale of environmental fallout will rise to a level that undermines Alaska's long-term viability. For local people, the issues distill to survival. Subsistence hunters ask whether bowhead whales will return in sufficient numbers. Fisher families question whether salmon runs will stay intact. Entire villages contemplate relocation as coastal storms cut increasingly deep into permafrost edges. At the community level, discussions of geopolitics or market supply fade against a single, immediate question. Does the next season deliver the resources needed to endure? Every disruption shortens the margin for survival in places where alternatives are scarce and expensive. International policy frameworks have provided some momentum. The IMO's HFO ban is one example of progress layered with shortcomings. Conservation organizations point to black carbon controls as another urgently needed step, with practical benefits for both ice preservation and health. Yet timelines of negotiation rarely match the on-the-ground pace of ecosystem change. Each year of delay means further melt, unsettled migrations, and rising conflict between people and wildlife driven into closer proximity. What stands out across all evidence is the cumulative nature of the stress. No single industry causes Alaska's ecological crisis independently. It is the convergence of shipping, oil, minerals, and military activity on top of climate shifts that creates a system near breaking point. The outcome is more than theory. Bowhead whale paths altered by noise directly change the success of community hunts. Salmon streams disturbed by mining exploration directly remove a winter's food base. Oil spills left uncontained could extinguish entire fisheries. For Alaskans, these are the thresholds against which the future is measured. For policymakers, they are warnings that strength in one domain, strategic advantage, may equate to vulnerability in another, environmental integrity. By 2025, the portrait is stark. The Arctic's acceleration as a strategic engine for global powers carries undeniable economic and security gains. But the boom exacts an ecological cost that grows harder to reverse as each year passes. Mitigation is possible, but requires coordinated policy, Indigenous partnership, and costly preparedness. Three elements that have yet to align at the necessary scale. These tensions make clear that Alaska's future will not be defined by defense systems or shipping counts alone. The same convergence of climate, geography, and competition that has elevated the state to global prominence also ensures that its fate will ripple beyond its borders. How the United States manages this frontier will set the course for what the Arctic becomes in the decades ahead, and whether transformation remains within the bounds of resilience or shifts irreversibly toward decline. Alaska has become a geopolitical pivot where defense, energy, and trade now converge. It anchors America's missile shield, holds vast resource reserves, and sits astride shipping lanes whose traffic, according to Payne data, has risen by more than a third over the past decade. Billions in new military and port investments confirm that these pressures are unfolding in real time. But the same forces reshape ecosystems and indigenous lifeways, forcing real trade-offs between security, commerce, and survival. Which of those trade-offs surprised you most? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more deep dive explorations.